Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's review is God's Teeth for Delta Green the role-playing game by Arcdream Publishing, Part 5. This part will cover the chapter Red Thought and be split into 3 parts. After the events of the long years, we jump to the summer of 2016, 15 years after the horrors of Cornucopia House, and it appears that the agents have managed to escape the law. However, fate will put them back into the hunt. As the agents have tried to live their lives, the children who survived have become willing predators of the force that controls them. The orphans of Cornucopia House have grown up, and being immigrants and reminders of neglect has thrust them into a foster care system that cares nothing for them. As they grew, some of them recovered due to loving and supportive parents, and their terror in the presence of adults lessened, and they acquired language, which quietened the voice of the thing from beyond within them. However, these were the minority. Their caretakers, never being held accountable for their truly awful actions, caused some of them to have severe disability in language and were within a system that passed the buck, though some of them acquired language despite this, and some of them found it to be an anchor that weighed them down with trauma, despair, addiction, prison, and with some even taking their own lives. Still others resented the ability to speak, as it destroyed their togetherness with their brothers, sisters, and the voice from beyond, and they became cut off, though remembered the wrath that acted as a safety blanket, and they had a longing for the certainty this gave them. As it stands, many of them slipped through the cracks or grew too old for the system. To those who the silence fell early, they see the signs carved into reality, in synchronicity and the smell it emits, and move through probability using pathways cut by their god. Those that speak help their silent brothers and sisters, wanting to out of desperation and stay with their true family, the only one they've ever known, and all have a part to play in the assembled timelines and have heard the call. It begins with 3 of the abandoned children, Elle Gable, Samuel Ball and Thomas Perez, committing a murder. A woman in Florida who is responsible for bringing the teeth together, though this is something the children could never know as their thoughts move in motion with their god. When the time is right, she's found. After this, they moved on to the social worker who left them with the babushka as she is murdered, and finally the teeth awaken. The agents, the god's teeth, are being called to the great hunt, and they are bound to join the slaughter, for it is to feed the god of all. We have an op-int here which talks about the agents covering up all traces of the events of Go Forth with a mission of damage control. The agents are still haunted by something that drives them to murder, especially the unnatural, and as the threat to the programme lessens, the mission changes to the second part, White Teeth, where they hunt for the killers of Kerry Houghton. As so, it all begins with the agents being informed of the programme to travel to DC on a Thursday morning for some reassignments and readjustments, this not being an unusual event that is always done in person so as to not leave a paper trail. They know nothing else. The keeper should inquire as to their current state of the agents' lives as they say farewell to their bonds. Then, they must all roll a D100. The agent that rolls the highest is the first to arrive. The 5th floor of a fairly uninteresting DC office building that is leased to WeWork. The place is fairly empty. The conference room they meet in is sterile, with only a plastic table, chairs and a TV in there. The floor is bare from having no carpet. Then, the agent who rolls second highest enters, and this is the first time they've laid eyes on each other since 2001. Neither knew the other were in the programme, and both make a sand check for 0/1 from helplessness. The players are encouraged to stay in character and play the scene out. The remaining agents meet in the elevator, taking the same sand hit, and again, they should stay in character. We have a disinformation box out here that informs the keeper on how the programme briefs the agents, talking about how the group should be named. After giving them time to stew, and Anthony Pizzarelli will come in, looking dishevelled, with a water bottle filled with cold coffee. He simply sits down without saying anything and turns on the cable news, muting the TV. He will sit with his back to the agents in silence if nobody speaks, and then the news will report 56 bodies found at the site of Maryland Youth Home. Should the agents wait until the news report finishes, everything will be explained. If someone speaks, he will interrupt, asking if anybody knows why they are here. If nobody talks or even begins talking, he will angrily tell them that 10 days ago a woman was found in her trailer in Florida, half eaten by swamp animals, and the first responder found a slip of paper with their names and addresses at the scene. Pizzarelli is angry and scared, becoming nasty and sarcastic as he tells the agents what's occurred. A week ago, a Florida deputy called Maryland State Police and Social Services asking about them by name. Then 3 days ago, a Maryland State Trooper drove to the former site of the home, having never noticed it there before, and a storage facility now sits there next to a prison. Here she found a woman who'd been brutally murdered. nailed to a door with screwdrivers, head smashed open and a dog chewing on a skull. Just 2 days ago, program intelligence analysts noticed the agents being flagged by name in relation to the murders in Maryland and Florida. And yesterday, the director himself called Pizzarelli, telling him to keep the agents' names out of official reports and the news, find out what they and Delta Green had to do with the 56 bodies being dug up, and work out if they are a threat to the program. He will wrap up the whole lecture with 3 questions. What happened? Why shouldn't he feed you to the law and news? And why did they not bring it up when brought in from the cold? There is a synchronicity event which determines that one of the agents had some interaction with Pizzarelli of a positive but brief nature in their youth. They should be asked what it was and how it ended. Have that agent roll in ×5. Failure leaves a nagging doubt, but success makes them realise that if the situation is as bad as Pizzarelli says it is, they should be dead or in jail, and he must have said something. That agent makes a SAN check for 0/1 SAN loss due to helplessness. At this point, the agents may bring up that when they were recruited, they were not asked about what they had done before, and even if they were, they seemed disinterested in knowing, though Pizzarelli will scoff at this, even if it is true. More interested that there are 56 dead children and someone needs to be blamed. This is what America needs, and everyone is looking for a scapegoat. Sadly, the agents have been mentioned by name in relation to a separate murder, and if someone is to be thrown under the bus, the agents are first in line. Once they've told him about Cornucopia House, he realises that protecting Delta Green is the only priority, and the agents have worked with Delta Green for years at this point, with the risk of multiple operations being exposed due to the seriousness of the crime, which could lead investigators down a rabbit hole of crimes and subsequent cover-ups, something he is unwilling to do. The agents need to clean this mess up. If they are unable to erase their involvement, then their attempts will no doubt be used against them, and failure to sanitize the evidence will result in implicating them as co-conspirators. Obstruction will be seen as a group of perverts having their involvement covered up by the government, and Pizzarelli assures them they won't live long enough to see the courts. He advises them as their lawyer to bury or be buried by this. There are a number of factors. Were any investigations conducted in 2001, and as such are there any loose ends that could expose the programme? They will need to find this out and wipe away their involvements before investigators find out. What happened to the kids post-2001? Did any of them report details about the agents that could risk exposure of the programme? And if so, this paper trail needs to be destroyed. How did the deputy in Florida get their names and details of the happenings in Maryland? Was the woman being murdered a coincidence or related? The programme needs to hunt down the murderers before any more violence draws attention. Pizzarelli urges the agents to not investigate Florida yet, as the attention of the nation is on Maryland, and as such it is the greatest threat. They need to find the source of the issue, find out what local law knows, and make sure to keep their names out of the press. He will give them a false identity package that has a Maryland driver's licence, social security number, tax records for the last 7 years, and an educational history. The handler should let the players choose their false identities. To anybody not in the know, they are investigators working for Pizzarelli, though this does not make them law enforcement unless they already are. They are PIs and consultants under contract from the federal government. They have business cards showing them as working for the US Attorney's Office in Maryland, and those agents who are already FBI get false badges and ID cards. Pizzarelli tells them that these IDs will not stand up to scrutiny, and those who have law at 30% can have a roll of plus 20% to suspect that they have been set up this way on purpose, maybe with the intention being to make it easier to scapegoat them later on. Also, he tells them that a friendly team of specialists from Harvard are coming to assist them in studying the remains, though they are not fully briefed, so the agents must take care not to fully brief them. Though Pizzarelli's clear antagonism about the situation may grate against the agents, he will insist that the situation warrants it. He is just the messenger, an alternative to the assassins waiting for the order, and doesn't care how the agents handle it, as long as they make it go away. Essentially, Pizzarelli sees this going 3 ways. They run, though he expects them to realise that that is a big mistake. They lie, which means they become a threat to the programme, with the consequences being that they are put away or even vanish, something he imagined that they would rather avoid. Or they put things right, shaping the narrative and making them useful assets to the programme. He will tell them that they have a future with the third option. He informs them that they have been assigned to working group Masticate and will report to him. If they need anything, they call him. If they vanish, he tells the programme and they take it from there. This working group exists nowhere except within the programme, and they should never mention it except when talking to other programme agents. He tells them to avoid attracting further attention and then leaves the conference room. There is a strange synchronicity event that happens here. After he leaves, birds start slamming into the window of the conference room, leaving bloody streaks with one impact per agent. If they pass a relevant science or survival test, they will realise that some of these birds had predator-prey relationships and should not have been flocking together. This realisation causes 0/1 SAN loss from helplessness. Pizzarelli leaves the agents a document of the event that led to this meeting. It covers 3 pages and begins on the 8th to the 15th of August 2016 with an elderly resident reporting to local law enforcement that her cats have been stolen, then to a sheriff heading out to take a look at Myers Point Trailer Park and finding the decayed and mutilated body of a woman, with events gradually unfolding and culminating to the point where Pizzarelli meets the agents in the conference room on the 25th of August 2016. Next we move on to the cover-up. The agents have a number of options available to them, which it encourages should be broken down on a whiteboard or online equivalent to them. Their absolute number one priority should be to get hold of any information on Cornucopia House's past in order for it being unable to be used against them and further down the line, Delta Green. In order to do this, they need to take control of the investigation, though are only permitted to go after potential suspects after the secrecy of the programme is ensured. Pizzarelli will outline the programme's concerns. There's the blame game. Nobody wants to take on the responsibility of having let this happen, and it is a hot potato that nobody wants to handle. It should not get any closer to the programme. There is the old investigation. Back in 2001, did the police turn up anything that is a risk to the agents in 2016? There is the cornucopia investigations. Awful things have been dug up in the mass grave. They need to be made to vanish. There is the murder of Kerry Houghton. She was once responsible for the county services approvals of Cornucopia House. The murderers were led to her somehow. The agents need to find out what this is before it ends up in their laps. And finally, there is the children of Cornucopia House. What happened to them post-2001? The programme needs their trail to disappear so they can't be questioned. The agents will be encouraged to find the murderers who kicked the whole thing off, and working group Mastercake can have the expectation of being sent to take them out when the current troubles reach a satisfactory conclusion. The point is made that at each step the agents need to assess the risk to the programme. Should it imply the existence of the unnatural of Delta Green, the evidence needs to be removed and or reinterpreted, and Delta Green sees the agent's involvement in the event of 2001 as needing the same treatment. There is a basic procedure that they need to stick to. They need to assess whether evidence can be traced back to them or the unnatural, though Delta Green has no issue with evidence that solves the murders. The agents need to launder it to remove any identifying characteristics by either reinterpreting it, creating a false narrative where possible by manipulating the Maryland State Police, Cecil County Sheriff and the press into a safe interpretation of events, and it is even preferable that they compete and contradict each other. Where it cannot be reinterpreted, it needs to be removed. Records are able to be changed, stolen and redacted where required, though this could be risky, obvious and even lead to prison if they're not careful. Though the deletion of evidence is risky and suspicious, maybe being investigated further down the line, it's ultimately better than answering these questions in court. Should this fail, the programme will employ terminal options: threats, sabotage of reputations, or people simply vanishing. This is something the agents will have to do themselves, with the appropriate SAN loss applying to such extreme measures. If, however, the agents draw too much attention, then they jump to the top of the programme's list for the same treatment. It is clear that even as they take charge of the investigation, they need to keep any trace of Delta Green from the public consciousness. State and local officials are being represented by Detective Almudena Velasquez and Mike Costa, and they are desperate to pass the buck on these long-forgotten atrocities. The Baltimore Sun has a reporter present, Olivia Centrell Tumi, and their readers are hungry for the horrors of Cornucopia House to be revealed. As the agents cover up their past misdeeds, these forces will challenge and hinder them at inappropriate times. How they respond to these threats can work to make the cover-up more or less effective, and as such extreme measures may be taken. So firstly we have Velasquez. She's a 38-year-old detective sergeant in the Maryland State Police, the state's lead investigator on the case. Having a background in organised crime, she was given this case as she's the only person still living from 2001, and this affects how she interacts with the agents. The state governor is calling her personally for updates, and she's feeling the political pressure. She was a rookie in 2001, possessing little authority to shape the investigation, and she understands that her failure may burn everything down. She wants to do a good job for all of the dead children being dug up from the ground, and finds the whole thing vile, wanting justice, but understanding that keeping the governor happy may be the only way she gets to take the time to hunt down the culprits. If she gets any hint of the involvement of the agents in 2001, then she will be relentless, and if they do anything illegal in the meantime, this will be exacerbated. The meddling of the Department of Justice has everyone nervous that it'll be shoved in front of her to deal with. She has secured the help of the Cecil County Sheriff's Office in the form of Deputy Michael Costa. They will try their best to stay involved, and they will both interpret the agent's secrecy as being them preparing to interpret the evidence in such a way that the state and county take the blame. Secondly, we have Costa. He's a 33-year-old deputy who is here as a liaison for the Criminal Investigations Division of Cecil County Sheriff's Office, whose coroner dealt with the preliminary work on the remains before the feds became involved. State investigators dealt with Cornucopia House 15 years ago, and as such Costa passed the case up the chain of command before the third body was found. Due to his handling of the case, he is fully expecting a promotion when this is dealt with. In actuality, Cecil County has the least blame to bear. In 2001, the presence of the adoption facility jumped it to state level immediately, and the county was unable to handle such a vast investigation even if they wanted to, and they still don't want to. The sheriff understands that due to their size, they have little influence if the feds drop the responsibility of over 50 murders in front of them, and his priority is to stop this happening, though he will put on a good show of support for Velasquez. He has ambition and will let state investigators take this one on the chin, and Velasquez in particular for the mishandling of the case in 2001. This makes him a potential asset for the agents. There's another full-page op-int which discusses handling the blame game. It suggested that Velasquez-Costa unalliance of the both of them alongside the press caused problems. It's up to the agents to decide what will keep them at arm's length, and that no encounter should be inconsequential. The reporter and the detectives are smart, and after using a skill on them, the next time they use the same skill on the character, it's at minus 20%, so they need to be creative. Ultimately, there is no deciding role to see if the agents are successful. They need to collect information and craft a story about what really happened, which the programme will feed out to the relevant parties, though the agents should not know this. The agents need to play out how natural they can make it all happen, with ideally another tragic story slipping into the public consciousness and all agents fearing for the blame they could take being able to back away. Should they fail to keep evidence out of the hands of one of the detectives, they may see themselves retasked. They may need to incriminate and wreck the reputation of a journalist, making deals with the devil to bury the truth and force an injustice to happen to an innocent. The purpose of this chapter is to make the agents take stock of the past, while simultaneously repositioning the influence of Bast in order to make the last 15 years seem more like a prelude than an end to the events of that fateful night in 2001. Bureaucracy should not detract from that, as this is the purpose here. It must also be stressed that the programme is on their side and Working Group Masticate has the authority to do what needs to be done. The blame game exists to show agents how inadequate even Delta Green are in the face of this threat, and saving the world from unnatural horrors seems almost secondary to institutional survival in the present, however petty, insistent and inconsequential this may seem in the grand scheme of things. So, back to the complications. The third is Tumi. She is a 42-year-old reporter from the Baltimore Sun. Due to previous conflicts with management, she was relegated to low-impact stories for almost 10 years. Only recently was she assigned to reporting on criminal justice, and sees a massive story like this as being capable of kickstarting her career out of the dead end it's currently sat in, which is her driving motivation. She goes to the site of Cornucopia House every day, being denied permission to go inside. She sees Pizzarelli's press releases as meaningless, dropped to distract the competition. She constantly probes the scene's perimeter, unafraid of the threats of prosecution should she be found within. Her drone is in the air at all times due to the cameraman she's hired, checking for license plates and faces she can chase outside the crime scene. She intercepts and attempts to interview all officials leaving the property, and Tumi is an easy way to throw Velasquez or Costa under the bus should the agents decide to pursue that course of action. Next, we move on to the old investigation. Pizzarelli will tell them that their first priority is to learn what the first investigation 15 years ago uncovered. Cornucopia House is absent from any database searches, and Cecil County and Maryland State Police have decided that the lack of meaningful information deems the site's history as unrelated to the death of Kerry Houghton, though the graveyard that now exists there is causing investigators to have second thoughts. Velasquez is the key to the 2001 investigation. She was reassigned to assist two older troopers, Keith Baswell and Bob Dale of the Criminal Investigations Bureau, though both of them have since passed in 2009 and 2012 respectively. The combination of Velasquez's memory of events, how much they find the file useful, the narrative of the cold case and the difficulties in obtaining all of this will change depending on what was left at the scene in 2001. We have a box out here called Complications. Velasquez will require a promise of cooperation before volunteering any information other than the official 2001 narrative. That being that Maryland State Police remain in the loop of all decisions to do with the investigation. Should she learn that any of the agents masquerading as working for the Department of Justice come from any federal background other than law enforcement, she will ask to be assigned to the group as a liaison, though agents may use persuade to get any concessions they could think of, and a human role could determine that Costa could probably do the same for a cheaper price. If the agents discuss the old investigation outside the precinct or secure crime scene, Tumi will tail them and listen in, though alertness could spot her. Failing this, Tumi will work both official and unofficial narratives from 2001 into her story. Here we have a map of the region, and then we move on to a section called Cornucopia House as a Scam. Should it be the case that the agents were careful in 2001 and left little or nothing behind, Velasquez will not suspect them of foul play, and the official narrative can be found out without rolling. Velasquez's personal recollections can be drawn out with law, bureaucracy, or persuade. The official narrative is that the more children who replace the Cornucopia House, the greater the amount of money they receive from the state. The adults vanishing was blamed on them getting in too far over their heads in scamming welfare, with factors such as the state of the facility, the age of the owner, and the amount of children present seen as motivations to abandon the place, with caring for the children being seen as too expensive and hard, and thus they fled for Eastern Europe. Damage at the site was seen as the caretakers trying to fake their debts, and an APB was put out for the owner, Elena Calamatiano, and her employees on suspicion of child neglect, though nobody was ever found. The children questioned, but nothing gleaned from it, though one was questioned due to a fingerprint match. More on FBI case 07-195121 in a bit. The state then closed the case due to the fingerprint match being federal. From Velasquez's memory, Baswell and Dale were sceptical about many aspects of the case, with the adults fleeing with absolutely nothing beyond the clothes that they were wearing. Due to no evidence, the vanishing caretakers were blamed, as there were no parents, community or administrative pressure to keep the case open, and despite Baswell and Dale pressuring to keep it open, the case was closed. Velasquez moved back to her normal duties and the detectives moved on. Should the agent have left evidence behind, Velasquez knows it is related to the graves despite anything official. Without a warrant to back it up, Maryland State Police would not expose their records to a federal audit. However, she is looking for those with the right connections and contacts to protect her. Should a law, persuade or bureaucracy role be used to glean information from her, an additional role can encourage her to reveal her own commentary. The official narrative in this instance is that Ryan Innocenti's prior drug convictions and the presence of such things in the house indicate that it was a drug-related crime, stemming back to his days in Brighton Beach, where he was regarded by informants as a cowardly snitch. It's thought that the charity was a front for his drug operation and that Elena Calamatiano was senile, allowing him to manipulate the other staff. It's presumed that the staff were murdered on site by an organised crime syndicate, and a small mercy that the children survived, though their young age and fear made questioning them a pointless endeavour. Also, they believe that any damage caused to the facility was done by the syndicate. Velasquez will remember Baswell and Dale being not entirely convinced by this narrative, as the crime seemed way more personal, and with Innocenti's deviant sexual urges, a stronger motive was suspected. The drug narrative, however, was easier to explain to the state, as less of a scandal could be made from it, and was in their opinion much more forgivable than decades of child trafficking. They decided that the risk to their careers was too great, and again, without living family or competing criminal interests, it was the most believable narrative. One of the children was identified by fingerprints in the missing persons database, and was questioned by the feds after being adopted out of state, though Maryland State Police only found this out a long time after he'd been sent there. Velasquez's bosses at the time had posited the idea of kidnapping not being the motive. However, if rescue or revenge had been a motive, then why wasn't the child removed from the scene? The final narrative is that of Cornucopia House being a cult. If the agents had left a lot of evidence, Baswell and Dale remained convinced that long-term devil worship had been happening there. Velasquez believes they were correct, though won't say it out loud for obvious reasons. The use of law, persuade or bureaucracy can be used at -20% to coax this out of her. The official narrative kept the investigation as confidential as possible, with no progress after a year and both Baswell and Dale disciplined for breaking departmental protocols, with the FBI reporting an attempt to secure unsanctioned consultation with federal law enforcement, bad enough that it permanently damaged their careers. Baswell quit and worked in security consultation until he died, and Dale retired early, with the case being declared cold a few days after being transferred to another unit. Though a cult explanation remained a dominant theory, the extent into how long it had been going on, nor its extent, appear nowhere in the reports. Velasquez remembers that Baswell and Dale were silent over their theories and that they remained paranoid about the investigation due to evidence she never got to see, only knowing about the missing persons case and will provide the agents with that case number. She knows they passed evidence to an FBI cult expert, but only found this out after they were disciplined. She's not sure whether they may have gotten slightly carried away with their theories, but knows that the general case was considered weird and is equally worried that they may have been onto something and lacked the political clout to see it through. So finally, we move on to FBI case 07-195121. The agents may either be told about this by Velasquez or come across it in the haphazard notes of 2001. Otherwise, they will dig it up when investigating what happened to the orphans of Cornucopia House. The numbering system of the FBI put it as case 195,121, meaning it was in the mid-1990s, and the 07 informs that it was a kidnapping. It is tightly sealed, with all communications about it directed to the FBI Office of General Counsel and the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General. Any FBI-connected agents looking into it face discipline charges, which indicates that it must have been the source of something bad for the Bureau. Finding out anything from the case file would require literal months of hearings, though this is possible later on in the chapter. Okay, that concludes part 5 of God's Teeth. The next video in this series will be the second part of Red Thoughts.